Welcome to another edition of BlameTheNetwork.com real-world networking videos. This video is not going to cover a real-world exercise as if you may see from daily role as a network administrator or network engineer. However, my intent with this video is to provide you with some tools of the trade as well as some tips and tricks for remotely managing networks. Obviously, in the networking and overall IT industry, it's very beneficial to be able to remotely access everything that you need to manage. And there are plenty of tools at your disposal in order to do that with the networking equipment. And this comes in handy when you have networking devices that are not all physically located at your particular place of work, or perhaps you are remoting in from home, VPNing in, something along those lines. Oftentimes you're going to be dealing with equipment that's located in different parts of your country, possibly around the world. And you don't necessarily always have other technical personnel that can assist in troubleshooting or making changes to these devices. So be it if you're troubleshooting an outage or making an approved change that you have a scheduled outage for, being able to remote in and manage these devices is going to be beneficial to increase your efficiency and keep things moving along. Moving on to some of the tools of the trade you have at your disposal, the top bullet point is management VLAN. And what this means is when you're initially setting up your network, or if you're going to reconfigure for best practices, what you're going to want to do is set up a management VLAN, essentially a segmented subnet, a different subnet for you to be able to use to access your devices. This is going to give you a broadcast break between your typical data traffic and your management functionality, so that should decrease some chances of broadcast storms and some other things along those lines that would be able to restrict your ability to remote into those devices. Furthermore, some of the tools that are listed down below management VLAN require you to send data from your devices to say a server, for example, from a specific IP address or a specific interface. So by having a management VLAN, it gives you the ability to use a set standard across the board for sending that traffic out to those servers. And lastly, of course, you're going to want to get familiar with your IP scheme, and having a management VLAN, if you're familiar with the subnet and you use it regularly for all your devices, then you'll increase your ability to quickly get into various devices and manage them, as opposed to if you're trying to hunt down in a IP manager where exactly this device is or what its IP address is you're supposed to get into. You should know off the top of your head kind of what VLAN it's going to be in. Moving on to the next bullet point, you've got SSH and remote access. Obviously, the ability to create a secure shell into your devices is crucial, and you're not going to get very far without it. So Telnet does fall into those same lines there, but any chance you get, as long as the device and the operating system supports it, you're going to want to get SSH running, because Telnet data is sent in plain text. So SSH is going to give you the encryption there, so that your information can't be captured on the wire. And next bullet point I've got listed is TACACS and Radius. It goes along the lines of SSH. Obviously, you can set up local logins for all your devices, but if you have the ability to stand up a Radius server, which is essentially the underlying technology that TACACS rides on, Cisco's particular spin is the Cisco ACS server. The ability to have centralized account management and then have all of your devices point to that server, so you can use one set of credentials across the board and not have to manage a bunch of different accounts, is obviously nice to have. It also usually gives you, using AAA for your devices, it gives you a bit more granular control over permissions, and you can allow different sections to be able to maybe perform a certain subset of commands on the devices, whereas maybe the yourself or your team can perform full functionality on the devices. And as well, it gives you some accounting capabilities so that you can keep track of who made what changes, so that some accountability can be upheld if something doesn't go well. Next bullet point, moving on, is SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol. And SNMP gives you a SNMP as a protocol, and there's a couple different versions to it, but essentially its purpose is to provide a way to access information about your devices remotely. Typically, you're not going to be using SNMP yourself by hand using any third-party software. What you're going to do with SNMP is usually set up a credential set and then have some sort of a management server access your devices with that credential set. And then it has access to the MIB database, and the MIB database has different MIB objects in it that it can pull for data. So each different kind of device has their own set database on what kind of information you can pull, and information from within that database could be as broad as even temperatures of the device if it's got a sensor inside of it, to current status of different interfaces and things along those lines. SNMP ties in heavily to the next bullet point, which is software. So your commercial solutions like SolarWinds, your freeware solutions like PRTG, Nagios, etc. These are going to be your ability to keep a good overall view on how your network is running. And I've got PRTG running internal on my remote LAN. So I've got some devices listed on here, and this just shows you an example of how this isn't particularly utilizing SNMP. However, it should be, because I could pull a lot more data with SNMP, but most of these devices I just have set up as an ICMP status, so it's just pinging out and making sure that they're responding. Quite a few of them are actually offline at the moment. But yeah, with SNMP you're going to be able to see better metrics on your devices. And again, this is just one example of a network monitoring solution. Let me see if I have NetFlow covered next. I do have NetFlow covered next. So NetFlow is a protocol that allows you to sample packets that are going across the lines, and it lets you get information as far as who the top talkers are on your network, what different hosts are talking to other hosts, and more particularly interesting, what ports and protocols are primarily being used on your network. Now, this is good for statistical data and information that you can provide to management, but it also, if you have issues with, say, limited bandwidth, NetFlow is going to give you the ability to have eyes on and see exactly who's eating up all that bandwidth. So you may see protocols on the network such as torrent downloads, things like those, that you should actually be blocking anyway from the firewall level. But you can kind of pinpoint accuracy, see who's causing the problems, and then you can do some quality of service adjustments, or if it's a management level issue, you can shut down a user, obviously, and deal with it at that point. Depends on what your standards are for that sort of a situation. I do have, let me get into the core router here. I do have an SNMP poll, or not an SMP, I'm sorry, a syslog poller set up. Nope, sorry, NetFlow. Let's get back on topic here. Syslog I will cover in a little bit here. Logging is obviously important as well, but so yeah, with NetFlow, you're going to be, you can see in this little map example here, it shows, if I go into a full view of it, it's going to show kind of in a graphical sense the different hosts and where they're talking to on the network and who's using the most bandwidth. And scrolling down, it'll show you some various protocols that are in use and how much bandwidth they're currently using. So you can see some of these protocols listed, FTP, www, your web, you know, and it's also a way you can keep track to an extent on what kind of websites are being accessed as well. But yeah, that's good information to have. You don't need a network monitor like this to be able to see this NetFlow data. You can view it from within the Cisco iOS by doing show IP cache flow, and it will show you the information within the iOS from a command line view. And it's a little dirtier, but you can use that to get the job done if you don't have a good solution like this. Usually they come with good graphing options as well. I just booted the server back up so it doesn't have a whole bunch of data, but you can kind of look at the graph and see what your primary users are of your bandwidth. So NetFlow is definitely good information to have at your disposal for remotely managing networks and keeping an eye on why exactly different tunnels are getting oversaturated and who's all using the bandwidth. Good information to have in your side of the ring as well if you're looking to do upgrades on circuit sizes, because it's going to allow you to prove to your management or your purchasing types that you're going to need some more bandwidth in order to make things run a little bit more efficiently. So that is good to have. Let's jump back over to the slide real quick. Packet captures. These I typically use during the day if I'm doing some in-depth troubleshooting. So if I've exhausted my other resources and I'm not sure why something is behaving a certain way, I'll jump over to packet captures. Now, you're probably familiar with software like Wireshark. and previously called Ethereal years ago. And you can do captures on a host if you do a span port. So what span, and I should have probably tacked that onto this bullet point, but what span gives you the ability to do is take one of your network devices and span, say it's maybe it's uplink trunk to your internet service provider. You can span that to another port, and then you can have a host, a workstation or a server there with Wireshark. You can have it capture all the packets, and it's going to see every packet as if it were sitting on the wire between your router and your ISP. So it kind of makes duplicates of those packets and sends them over to a collector. So that's one way to do it. Now, the more efficient way to do it, available from, I believe, iOS 12.4t onward, and I've got another video on the website about it, is you can do an embedded onboard iOS packet capture. And there's a couple steps you need to do to set that up, to set up the buffer and the capture point. So I'm not going to cover them in this video. Again, there's another one that covers them more in depth. But packet captures from within the iOS is a more efficient way to not have to do a span or a remote span. God forbid you have to do a remote span. You have to set up a dedicated VLAN for it and then pump it through your network as a layer 2 VLAN to wherever you have your host you're trying to collect. The onboard iOS gives you the ability to do it right on the device itself, specify an access control list for the purposes of specifying which data you're trying to capture. And you can do some other things with it as well, but essentially once you get done with the capture and stop it, you then have a file that you can export to a TFTP server, which brings us to the next bullet point pretty nicely, TFTP server. TFTP server, obviously you can do what I just said and export packet captures to from the iOS. It also gives you the ability to store maybe iOS version files or different baseline configurations that you can then use your network devices to pull and push from. As simple as a copy TFTP flash or copy flash TFTP command within the iOS will give you the ability to utilize a TFTP server. So that's another good tool to have at your disposal there. So you can already see just from the list here, I've got about eight different topics that give you a little bit more efficiency in remotely managing your network. I'm going to go ahead and jump on to the next slide here. This is kind of tips and tricks. I'm going to try and keep this video short. Trick number one is just kind of a rule of thumb for me personally, is stay in your chair as long as possible. I mean, this is IT, this is technology. You should not have to get up and go take a console cable and get into devices unless all shit hits the fan and you've done everything you can with all your other resources. Not to say if it's the most efficient way you shouldn't do it. Obviously, if you can already tell that everything's hosed and you need to start consoling in and fixing things up, then by all means go for it. But just before you get up and start moving around and lose picture on the overall view of your devices, try and utilize all your resources as best as possible. And those resources obviously were listed on the previous slide, as well as some of the next abilities coming up here. Bullet point number 2, I'm not going to go too in depth onto this one, but EEM scripting. Something you can do with the iOS is you can set up EEM scripts, which will you can set them to run at certain timed intervals, and it gives you the ability to make changes, maybe shut down an interface in the evenings, or adjust QoS policy at a given time based on needs of your business or organization. Anything that you could do sitting at the command line, make changes, you can EEM script out to do automatically for you. So there's some configuration management type solutions out there, most of them commercially driven, that you can use as well to push changes in an automated sense. But EEM scripting is your onboard way of setting up something if you have the same changes made at a given interval. So it's a good ability for you to have, and feel free to Google and look into more on that. I'm sure there's a million YouTube videos on how to set up some basic EEM scripts that are some things that you'd use on the daily basis. Multiplexing, I probably didn't title this one as well as I should have, but let me switch over to Viral here, or the VM Maestro for Viral. And what I mean by multiplexing is if you have, say, multiple devices. Let me go ahead and get these to where I need them to be real quick. Okay, so what I mean by multiplexing is you can, for example, within Viral, you can go over to the right and I can see both the devices and I can check them both at the same time and run the same command on both of them. So just a real basic example command, I can do a show run interface gig 01. and it's going to run the same command on both of them at the same time. They're going to take a second to build their configurations. It looks like there's the layer 2 switch, and there is the routers config that popped up. So this was just an example show command, but obviously you could use the same kind of ability to send commands to multiple devices at the same time if you're trying to make a change. Now you have to be very knowledgeable of your topology, and you don't want to fire off a change in a production network to multiple devices if you're not 100% certain that it's going to take on all of them. Obviously something simple like changing the NTP server, you just need to go config T and then put in the respective NTP commands, and you can fire that one off for the most part to every device at the same time. But anything involving interfaces or VLANs that may not be the same across the board, you may need to get a more in-depth scripting solution to be able to identify differences and push them at the same time. Obviously, it's anytime that you can make changes to multiple devices at once as opposed to going to them individually is going to give you an increased efficiency. So that's just another thing that I wanted to cover and remind you guys about if you're unfamiliar. Crawling for an unknown topology. Crawling is just what I'm calling it, kind of spidering through devices. So if you say perhaps you don't have a good monitoring solution, or you have a site you are trying to remotely support that you don't fully understand how it's set up, you can go, I'm in the router right here, you can see towards the bottom, you can jump into one of your devices and just start doing something like show CDP neighbor, show IP OSPF neighbor, show IP EIGRP neighbor, whatever you got to do to start identifying where these different connected devices are. If you do show CDP neighbor detail, it's going to pull you information about the IP address of the other device. So that's going to allow you to then take that IP address and remote into it and kind of continue crawling your way through the network and mapping things out on your own. You may need a piece of paper and a pen next to you to kind of draw where everything's connected. It's going to show you what interfaces they're connected to locally as well as on the remote device. So if you cannot remote into the device by yourself, obviously this router can see the switch, so I'd be able to, from the router, ideally I could SSH to the switch or telnet to the switch from the router itself because it's directly connected. So that gives you the ability to crawl through devices that maybe you can't access yourself either. Jumping back over to the PowerPoint. Logging is crucial. Obviously within the let me go back over to Viral real quick. Within the devices themselves, you should have logging set up where you can see these different log messages that are already in here. For example, interface gig 1, gig 01 changed state to administratively down, so that means someone physically shut that port down. Seeing information like that is going to be beneficial in helping you identify what changed. Typically, if you're troubleshooting an outage, something changed. Obviously, you're not going to, either you're the one that did it or somebody else did it and either didn't realize what they did or aren't fessing up to it. So logging on the devices themselves is going to help. However, if the device has restarted for whatever reason, which you can see from show version, you can see this router uptime, for example, is 31 minutes. So that's another one that I don't have a bullet point on. But if you want to see if your device restarted and you don't have a good monitoring solution, do a show version in iOS. It's going to show you how long it's been online. But if your device restarted, it's going to dump its log internally. So what you want to do is you want to set up logging to a remote host. Typically you'll have a syslog server, and you can walk your way through essentially just logging the IP address, and then you have to put the trap level that you want as far as how granular you want the messages to be. When you start logging them to a remote server, then the server will maintain those records even after the device restarts. So if you don't have logging to a remote server, you're hosed if the device restarts. So you definitely want to get that set up and use that to help you troubleshoot or look up some things on devices. And lastly, one of my favorite is reload in at on. Once again, I'm going to jump back over to Viral and jump out of config T. Whoops. And so if you type reload, hit space, hit question mark for context help, you can see some of those. My apologies, I didn't mean to put on in that slide, but anyway, you can see at or in there. At is going to allow you to set a specified time. So I could say reload at 12 o'clock, and then you can set a day, month, and the reason. Excuse me. And so this is going to allow you to do a scheduled reload. An example that you might want to use this on is if you have a new iOS file copied over to this device, but you're not ready to reboot it just yet. Maybe it's in production and you want to do a reload after hours. Now, there's a chance that it could corrupt or something could not go well, or maybe one of your modules or something will fail. And so you're going to want to check after it reloads to make sure it's up. If you have an ability to remote in and use a monitoring tool, or if you have maybe a 24/7 monitoring service, a third-party service that keeps an eye on your devices, maybe you'll get a pager alert if they even use those anymore, or a text message or email or something. But yeah, this is a good way to be able to reload it when you're not physically at the device. But the more specific reason I listed this as an option for increased remote management efficiency is if you're going to make a sketchy change that you're not sure if it's going to take, or you think you might lose access to a device that you're remoted into. There's no worse feeling in the world than accidentally shutting down the uplink trunk or maybe a VLAN that you were using to access this device. If you fry your connection to a device remotely and you have nobody there that can restart it or access the device, or you don't have any technical personnel on site, you're pretty much screwed. So you might as well get in your car, get on a plane, whatever you got to do. But this command can save you if you do a reload in and then say 10 minutes. It's going to ask if you want to save the config. Proceed with reload confirm. Now you'll see a logging message come up that says that reload scheduled in 10 minutes. It's going to pop up incremental messages as the time starts counting down to remind you that it's still set to reload. But at this point, you can make any sort of changes that you're afraid are going to drop your connectivity. And if you do lose connectivity, after that timer runs down, it's going to reload the device to the iOS prior to your changes. So obviously don't do any writes after you're making these changes. But what that's going to do is allow you to then regain access to the device. Obviously, you want to be careful doing this in production hours unless you're troubleshooting and needing to fix an outage that there's an understandable reason to do so. But yeah, this gives you a very efficient way to make changes that you're afraid are going to cut you off. Now, if you make the changes and they successfully hold and everything seems fine and you can close your session to it and reopen and still remote into the device, what you're going to want to do is a reload cancel. And it'll tell you shut down aborted. So then you know that you're good to go and this device isn't going to shut down. You can write your config at that point and be set and good to go. The only other one that I'll cover that's not in a bullet point, this one is not as crucial as the reload command, but you can do a send command, and you can send it to specific lines or to the log. For example, I might send a message to the log saying making change XYZ, and then if it's sending log messages to a server, I'll kind of have a point on the logging where I can see when I made a change, and it gives me kind of a reference point. However, another use for the sending or the send command is if I do a who, it's going to tell me the users that are connected. And for example, I'm consoled into this device, so I don't have a username listed. Excuse me, and it shows my VTY port I'm connected to. Well, I guess console port in this example. But if you had users that were remoted in, say you have a team and another person's remoted in from a different location, if you're going to make a change and you're not talking to them on the phone or on Messenger or something like that, what you can do is send, and you can just use an asterisk, and it's going to send it to every other potentially logged in user as well as the log. And you can send a message, say making change X, possible reload coming. And when you're done, you just hit Control Z to end. If you mess it up, Control C will abort it. When I end, it's going to ask if I want to send the message. I confirm by hitting enter. And you can see it even popped up on my line because I sent it to all other lines. So making change X, possible reload coming. So anyone else that's logged into the device is then going to see that, and they're going to know that, it'll show who sent it, so they'll know kind of what's going on. So that's pretty much all I got to cover for you. Again, utilize your resources, your tools, as well as these couple of tips and tricks, and hopefully that'll allow you to increase your efficiency in managing devices remotely. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and thanks for watching.